24. When Vronsky looked at his watch on the Karenin's veranda, he was so agitated and so preoccupied that he saw the hands and face of the watch without realizing the time. He went to the high road, stepping carefully over the mud, and made his way to his calash. He was so full of his feeling for Anna that he did not consider what o'clock it was, or whether he still had time to call on Briansky. He only retained, as often happens, the external capacity of memory, which indicated what he had decided to do next. He approached his coachman, who was dozing on the box, in the already slanting shadow of a large lime tree, looked with pleasure at the swaying swarms of midges that whirled above the perspiring horses, and having roused the coachman, jumped into the calash and told him to drive to Briansky's. Only after going some 5 miles did he recollect himself sufficiently to look at his watch and to realize that it was already 5:30, and that he was late. There were to be several races that day: a lifeguards race, then an officers' 2-verst race, a 4-verst race, and then the one for which he had entered. He could be in time for his own race, but if he called on Briansky first, he could only just manage it, and the whole court would already be at the racecourse. That was not the correct thing to do. But he had promised Briansky to call, and therefore he decided to go on, telling the coachman not to spare the horses. He saw Briansky, stayed with him 5 minutes, and drove back at a gallop. This quick drive soothed him. All that was depressing in his relations with Anna, the indefiniteness that remained after the conversation, escaped from his mind. He now thought with enjoyment and agitation of the race, and that after all he would be there in time, and occasionally the expectation of that night's meeting flashed brightly in his imagination. The spirit of the coming races overcame him more and more as he drove further and further into their atmosphere, and overtook carriages making their way to the course from Petersburg and from outlying country places. When he reached his quarters, he found no one there. They had all gone to the races, and his valet was waiting at the gate. While he was changing his things, the valet told him that the second race had already begun, and that many gentlemen had been to inquire for him, and a lad had run over twice from the stables. Having changed without hurrying, he never hurried or lost his self-control. Vronsky ordered the coachman to drive him to the stables. From there he could see the sea of carriages, pedestrians and soldiers surrounding the racecourse, and the stands, which were thronged with people. Probably the second race was just taking place, for as he entered the stables, he heard the bell ring. On his way, he met Machatin's wide-legged chestnut gladiator, which in a blue-bordered orange covering, with his ears looking enormous in the blue-trimmed cloth, was being led to the course. "Where's Cord?" he asked the groom. "In the stables, saddling." In her open box, Frou-Frou stood ready saddled. They were just going to lead her out. "I'm not late?" All right, answered the Englishman. "Don't upset yourself." Vronsky once again glanced at the beautiful, fascinating shape of the mare, whose whole body was trembling, and tearing himself with difficulty from this sight, he left the shed. He came towards the pavilions at the very best time to avoid attracting anyone's attention. The 2-verst race was nearly over, and all eyes were fixed on an officer of the horse guards in front, and on a hussar officer behind, who were urging their horses to the last limits of their strength as they neared the winning post. From within and without the ring, everyone was crowding toward the winning post, and a group of horse guards, officers and men, with loud shouts were expressing their joy at the expected triumph of their officer and comrade. Vronsky joined the crowd unnoticed, almost at the moment that the bell rang to announce the end of the race, and the tall officer of the horse guards, all bespattered with mud, who had come in first, was bending down in his saddle, loosening the reins of his grey gelding, which was dark with perspiration and panting heavily. The gelding, planting its feet with effort, reduced the speed of its enormous body, and the guards' officer, like one waking from deep sleep, looked round and forced himself to smile. A crowd of friends and strangers surrounded him. Vronsky purposely avoided the select and fashionable crowd which moved and chatted with restrained freedom in front of the pavilions. He is certain that Anna, Betsy, and his brother's wife were there, but in order not to agitate himself, intentionally avoided going near them. But he continually met acquaintances who stopped him, told him about the races that had been run, and asked him why he was so late. When the winners were called up to the pavilion to receive their prizes, and everyone was looking that way, Vronsky's elder brother, Alexander, a colonel with shoulder knots, of medium height, as sturdy as Alexis but handsomer and ruddier, with a red nose and a drunken though open countenance, came up to him. "Did you get my note?" he asked. "One can never find you." Alexander Vronsky, despite the loose and, in particular, drunken life for which he was noted, was quite a courtier. While speaking to his brother of a matter very unpleasant to him, he, knowing that many eyes might be fixed on them, wore a smiling expression, as if he were joking with him about some unimportant matter. "I received it, but really do not understand what you are worrying about," replied Alexis. "I am worrying because people have just remarked to me that you were not here and that you were seen in Peterhof last Monday. There are things which should be discussed only by those who are directly interested, and the matter you are concerning yourself about is one. Yes, but then one should not be in the army, or... I beg you not to interfere. That is all." Alexis Vronsky's frowning face turned pale, and his prominent lower jaw twitched, a thing that rarely happened to him. Being a very kind-hearted man, he seldom got angry, but when he did, and when his chin twitched, then he was dangerous, as Alexander Vronsky knew. Alexander smiled gaily. "I only wanted to deliver Mother's letter. Answer her, and don't upset yourself before the race. Bonne chance," he added, smiling, and went away. But just then, another friendly greeting stopped Vronsky. "Won't you recognize your friends? How do you do, mon cher?" said Oblonsky, shining here, amid all this Petersburg brilliancy, no less than he shone in Moscow, with his rosy face and glistening, well-brushed whiskers. "I came yesterday, and am very glad I shall witness your triumph. When can we meet?" "Come to the mess room tomorrow," said Vronsky, and apologetically pressing the sleeve of Oblonsky's overcoat, he went to the centre of the racecourse, where the horses were already being led out for the steeplechase. The perspiring, exhausted horses which had raced were being led away by their grooms, and one by one the fresh ones for the next race were appearing, most of them English horses, which in their hooded coverings and with their tightly girthed stomachs looked like strange, gigantic birds. To the right, the slender and beautiful Frou-Frou was being led up and down, stepping as on springs with their rather long elastic pasterns. Not far from her, they were taking the horse-cloth of the big-eared gladiator. The large, beautiful, perfectly irregular shape of the horse, with his wonderful hindquarters, and his exceptionally short pasterns just above his hoofs, involuntarily arrested Vronsky's attention. He wished to go up to his own horse, but was again stopped by an acquaintance. "Ah, there is Karenina," said the acquaintance with whom he was talking. "He's looking for his wife, and she's in the centre of the pavilion. Have you not seen her?" "No, I have not," said Vronsky, and without even glancing at the pavilion where Anna was pointed out to him, he went to his horse. He had not had time to examine the saddle, about which he wished to give some directions, when the riders were summoned to the pavilion to draw their numbers and places. With serious, stern, and in many cases pale faces, 17 officers assembled at the pavilion and drew their numbers. Vronsky got number 7. The order was given. "Mount." Feeling that he and the other riders were the centre toward which all eyes were turned, Vronsky, in the highly strung state which generally made his movements calm and deliberate, approached his horse. Cord, in honour of the races, was dressed in his best clothes. A black, buttoned-up coat, a stiff starched collar that pressed against his cheeks, a bowler hat, and top boots. He was calm and important as usual, and, standing in front of the horse, was himself holding both its reins. Frou-Frou continued to tremble as if in a fever. Her fiery eyes turned on the approaching Vronsky. Vronsky pushed his fingers under the girths. The mare turned her eyes still further back, showed her teeth, and sat back in ear. The Englishman puckered his lip, wishing to express a smile at anyone testing his saddling. "You'd better mount. You will be less excited." Vronsky glanced round at his rivals for the last time. He knew that he would not see them during the race. 2 of them were already riding toward the starting point, Galtsin, one of the formidable competitors and a friend of Vronsky's, was struggling with a sorrel gelding that would not let him mount. A short hussar in tight riding breeches was galloping along, bunched up like a cat in his desire to imitate an English jockey. Prince Kusovlev sat pale-faced on his thoroughbred mare from the Graber stud farm, which an Englishman was leading by the bridle. Vronsky and all his set knew Kusovlev and his peculiarities, which were weak nerves and terrible vanity. They knew he was afraid of everything, even of riding an army horse. But now, just because it was dangerous, because necks might be broken, and at each obstacle there was a doctor in attendance, an ambulance wagon with a red cross sewn on it, and a nurse, he had determined to ride. Their eyes met, and Vronsky winked at him, kindly and approvingly. The only one Vronsky did not see was his chief rival Makhatin on his gladiator. "Don't hurry," said Kord to Vronsky, "and remember one thing. Do not hold back or urge on your horse at an obstacle. Let her have her way." Very well," said Vronsky, taking the reins. "Lead if you can, but do not despair till the last moment if you are behind." The mare had not time to stir before Vronsky, with a powerful and agile movement, put his foot in the notched steel stirrup and seated himself lightly but firmly on the creaking leather of the saddle. Having got his right foot also in its stirrup, he straightened out the double reins between his practised fingers, and Kord removed his hand. As if not knowing which foot to step on first, Frou-Frou stretched the reins with her long neck and started as if on springs, shaking her rider on her flexible back. Kord, quickening his steps, followed them. The restive horse tugged at the reins, now to one side, now to the other, trying to deceive her rider, and Vronsky vainly sought by voice and hand to soothe her. They were already approaching the dammed-up stream on their way to the starting post. Some of the riders were in front, some behind, when Vronsky suddenly heard a voice galloping through the mud behind him, and Makhatin on his white-legged, large-eared gladiator went past him. Makhatin smiled, showing his long teeth, but Vronsky looked at him angrily. Vronsky always disliked him, and now considered him his most dangerous rival, and he was vexed with him for galloping past and so exciting Frou-Frou. She broke into a canter, gave 2 leaps, and, angry at the tightened rein, changed back into a jerky trot, jolting her rider. Kord also frowned, following Vronsky almost at a run. 25. 17 officers in all had entered for the steeplechase. It was to take place on the large 4-versed elliptical course in front of the pavilion. On that course there were 9 obstacles: the brook, a barrier nearly 5 feet high just in front of the pavilion, a dry ditch, a water jump, an incline, an Irish bank, one of the most difficult obstacles, consisting of a bank with brushwood on top, beyond which there was another ditch, which the horses could not see, so that they had to clear both obstacles or come to grief. Then 2 more water jumps, and another dry ditch. The winning post was opposite the pavilion, but the start was not on the ellipse, but about 250 yards to one side of it, and the first obstacle, the dammed-up brook 7 feet wide, was there. The riders could either ford or jump it at their discretion. 3 times the riders drew up in line, but each time someone's horse made a false start, and they had to line up again. Colonel Sastrin, an expert starter, was already getting angry, but at last, at the 4th try, he shouted, "Go!" and the race began. All eyes and all glasses were turned on the bright group of riders while they were getting into line. "They've started! They're off!" was heard from every side after the hush of expectation. Lookers-on, in groups or singly, started running from place to place to get a better view. In the first minute, the group of riders began to stretch out and could be seen in 2s and 3s, and one behind another, approaching the brook. It looked to the public as if they had all started together, but the riders were aware of a difference of seconds, which to them were of great importance. The excited and over-nervous Frou-Frou lost in the first moment, and several horses started ahead of her, but before reaching the brook, Vronsky, who with all his strength was holding back the mare that was tugging at the reins, had easily passed 3 riders, and ahead of him there was only Makhatin's chestnut gladiator, which hindquarters moved regularly and lightly just in front of him, and in front of all, the exquisite Diana, carrying Kusovlev, who was more dead than alive. In the first moments, Vronsky was master neither of himself nor of his mare. Up to the first obstacle, the brook, he couldn't control her movements. Gladiator and Diana approached the stream together, and almost at the same moment rose above it and flew across to the other side. Lightly as if on wings, Frou-Frou rose up behind them. But at the moment when Vronsky felt himself raised in the air, he suddenly saw, almost under his horse's feet, Kusovlev, who was floundering on the other side of the stream with his Diana. Kusovlev had let go of the reins at the jump, and the horse fell, throwing him over her head. These particulars Vronsky learned later. Now he only saw that Diana's head or legs might come just where Frou-Frou had to alight. But Frou-Frou, like a falling cat, made an effort with her legs and back while in the air, and clearing the other horse, rushed on. "Ah, you darling," thought Vronsky. After crossing the brook, Vronsky had the mare quite under control, and held her in, intending to cross the big barrier behind Makhatin, and then to try and pass him on the flat 300 yards before the next obstacle. The big barrier was right in front of the Imperial Pavilion. The Emperor, the whole court, and crowds of people were all looking at them. At him and at Makhatin, who was a full length ahead of him when they approached the Devil, as the solar barrier was called. Vronsky felt eyes directed toward him from all sides, but he saw nothing except the ears and neck of his mare, the ground racing toward him, and Gladiator's hind quarters and white legs rapidly striding before him, and keeping always the same distance ahead. Gladiator rose without touching anything, swished his short tail, and disappeared from Vronsky's sight. "Bravo!" shouted a single voice. Just then the boards of the barrier flashed close before Vronsky's eyes. Without the least change in her action, his mare rose under him. The boards disappeared, only behind him there was a knock. Excited by the fact that Gladiator was in front, the mare had risen at the barrier a little too soon, and had struck it with a hind hoof. But her pace did not change, and Vronsky, hit in the face by a lump of mud, realized that he was again at the same distance behind Gladiator. He again saw before him that horse's hind quarters, short tail and flashing white legs, no further away. At the very moment that Vronsky thought it time to pass Makhatin, Frou-Frou, understanding what was in his mind, without any urging, considerably increased her speed and began to draw nearer to Makhatin, on the side where it was most advantageous to pass him, the side of the rope. Makhatin would not let her pass that side. Vronsky had just time to think of coming up on the outside, when Frou-Frou changed her legs and started to do so. Frou-Frou's shoulder, which was already growing dark with sweat, was on a level with Gladiator's hind quarters. They ran side by side for a few strides, but before the obstacle they were approaching, Vronsky, not to lose ground, gave the mare her head, and just on the declivity passed Makhatin. He caught sight of his mud-bespattered face, and even thought he saw him smile. He passed, but felt that Makhatin was close behind him, and continually heard just behind his back the regular beating of hoofs, and the short, still fresh breathing of Gladiator's nostrils. The next two obstacles, a ditch and a fence, were easily passed, but Vronsky heard Gladiator galloping and snorting closer. He urged on his mare, and felt with joy that she easily increased her speed, and he heard the sound of Gladiator's hoofs again at the former distance behind. Vronsky now had the lead, as he had wished, and as Court had advised, and he was confident of success. His excitement and joy, and his tenderness for Frou-Frou, grew stronger and stronger. He wished to glance round, but dared not do so, and he tried to keep calm and not to urge his mare, but to let her retain a reserve of strength, such as he felt that Gladiator still had. There remained the most difficult obstacle. If he crossed it ahead of the others, he would come in first. He was galloping up to the Irish bank. He and Frou-Frou both saw the bank while still some way off, and to both of them came a momentary doubt. He noticed the mare's hesitation by her ears, and raised his whip, but immediately felt that his doubt was groundless. The mare knew what was wanted, and, as he expected, she increased her speed, took off exactly at the right moment, and gave a leap the force of which carried her far across the ditch. Then without effort and without changing her legs, Frou-Frou continued her gallop. "Bravo, Vronsky!" he heard the voices of a knot of people he knew, friends of his regiment, who were standing by this obstacle. He could not fail to recognize Joshvin's voice, though he did not see him. "Oh, my beauty," he thought of Frou-Frou as he listened to what was happening behind. He's over it, he thought, as he heard Gladiator again galloping behind him. There remained one last water jump, only 1.5 yards wide. Vronsky did not even look at it, but hoping to win by a distance, began working the reins with a circular movement, raising and dropping the mare's head in time with her stride. He felt the mare was using her last reserve of strength. Not only her neck and shoulders were wet, but on her withers, her head, and her pointed ears, the sweat stood in drops, and she was breathing short and sharp. But he knew that her reserve of strength was more than enough for the remaining 500 yards. It was only by feeling himself nearer to the ground and by the smoothness of the pace that Vronsky knew how much the mare had increased her speed. She leaped the ditch as if she did not notice it, seeming to fly across it like a bird. But at that very moment, Vronsky, to his horror, felt that something terrible had happened. He himself, without knowing it, had made the unpardonable mistake of dropping back in his saddle and pulling up her head. Before he could realize this, the white legs of the gelding flashed close by him, and Machotin passed at a rapid gallop. Vronsky was touching the ground with one foot. He scarcely had time to withdraw the foot before Frou-Frou fell on her side, and snorting heavily, and with her delicate damp neck making vain efforts to rise, began struggling on the ground at his feet, like a wounded fluttering bird. Owing to Vronsky's awkward movement, she had dropped her hind legs and broken her back. But he only understood this much later. Now he only saw that Machotin was quickly galloping away, while he, reeling, stood alone on the muddy, stationary ground. Before him, breathing heavily, lay Frou-Frou, who, bending her head toward him, gazed at him with her beautiful eyes. Still not understanding what had happened, Vronsky pulled at the reins. The mare again began to struggle like a fish, causing the flaps of the saddle to creak. She got her front legs free, but unable to lift her hindquarters, struggled, and immediately again fell on her side. Her face distorted with passion, pale and with quivering jaw. Vronsky kicked her with his heel in the belly, and again pulled at the reins. But she did not move, and, muzzling the ground, only looked at her master with eloquent eyes. "Oh," groaned Vronsky, seizing his head. "Oh, what have I done?" he exclaimed. "The race lost, and the fault mine, shameful and unpardonable, and this dear unfortunate mare ruined. Oh, what have I done?" Onlookers, a doctor, an attendant, and officers of his regiment ran toward him. To his regret, he felt that he was himself sound and unhurt. The mare had broken her back, and it was decided to shoot her. Vronsky was unable to reply to questions or to speak to anyone. He turned away and, without picking up the cap that had fallen from his head, left the racecourse without knowing where he was going. He felt miserable. For the first time in his life he experienced the worst kind of misfortune, one that was irretrievable and caused by his own fault. Yashvin overtook him with his cap and led him home, and in half an hour Vronsky came to himself, but the memory of that steeplechase long remained the most painful and distressing memory of his life.